At 8:46 in the morning, a U.S. Air Force reconnaissance jet called Elmendorf Air Force Base with 3 words that told them almost nothing. Experiencing vibration in flight. 19 men were on board. The aircraft was considered one of the most expensive in the United States Air Force. It was carrying a piece of radar technology so advanced that only one of them existed. And less than an hour later, it was gone. No wreckage, no bodies, no black box. Because it didn't have one. Just a call sign, a stretch of ocean, and a silence that has now lasted almost 6 decades. This is the story of Rivet Amber, and unlike a lot of Cold War mysteries, this one isn't buried in some classified vault somewhere waiting to be declassified. Most of what happened that morning is on the record. The transcripts exist. The search reports exist. And that's what makes the case so strange. We know almost exactly what was said in the final minutes. We just don't know what it meant. Let's go back to where it started. To understand why Rivet Amber disappearing was such a big deal, you have to understand what it was. This wasn't a routine cargo flight or a training sortie. Rivet Amber was a Boeing RC-135E, and there was only one of them ever built. The aircraft was designed around a single piece of equipment, a phased array radar built by Hughes Aircraft, capable of transmitting 7 megawatts. To fit it, engineers cut away a large section of the plane's metal fuselage and replaced it with a fiberglass composite radome, a distinctive pale band wrapped around the jet that crews could spot from a distance. Underneath the wings, where you'd expect nothing, sat what looked like 2 extra engines. One was real, a dedicated jet engine whose only job was powering the radar. The other was a heat exchanger, built to stop that radar from cooking itself alive. All of this made Rivet Amber heavier, more complex, and dramatically more expensive than any other aircraft in the RC-135 fleet. Some estimates put the cost at $35 million in 1960s money. It had a nickname, too. The crews called her Lisa Ann. Her job, alongside a sister aircraft called Cobra Ball, was to sit off the coast of the Soviet Union and track ballistic missile tests. This was deep Cold War work. Kamchatka, the Soviet missile test range, was roughly 300 miles from where these aircraft operated. Every flight out of their base was, in some sense, a flight toward the edge of a war that never quite started. And that base was about as far from anywhere as you can get. Shemya Island sits at the western tip of the Aleutian Chain, closer to Russia than to mainland Alaska. It's treeless, wind-scoured, and permanently damp. Crews who served there describe it less as an assignment and more as an endurance test. This was where Rivet Amber and Cobra Ball were based, flying under the Strategic Air Command's 6th Strategic Wing. By June of 1969, Rivet Amber had just come back from an operational mission. And here's where the story starts picking up detail that most people don't know. When ground crews inspected the aircraft after the mission, they found something concerning. Skin damage to the tail section, including the vertical stabilizer. This wasn't cosmetic. The tail is what keeps an aircraft flying straight and controlled. Damage there is the kind of thing maintenance crews take seriously, and they did take it seriously. Later accounts from personnel stationed on Shemya describe the maintenance concerns about damage to the tail, although surviving official records don't fully document how extensive those objections were. But the decision was made anyway. Rivet Amber would fly, not on an operational mission, just a ferry flight, from Shemya to Eielson Air Force Base near Fairbanks, so the damage could be properly inspected and repaired on the mainland. It was meant to be the safest kind of flight there is. No mission, no enemy airspace, just a jet going home for maintenance. At Eielson, a captain named Kingdon Hawes had just taken over as acting squadron commander. His predecessor had left for the lower 48 to attend his son's wedding. It was, by every account, an unremarkable rotation of duty on an unremarkable morning. Early that day, Rivet Amber took off from Shemya under the call sign Irene 92. 19 men were aboard. Pilots, navigators, electronic warfare officers the crews called Ravens, and in-flight maintenance technicians. Several of them had ties back to Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska, home of the Strategic Air Command. One of the men aboard, Staff Sergeant Richard Steen, had survived a different RC-135 accident just 5 months earlier, when the sister aircraft Rivet Ball hydroplaned off a runway. He was the only man to have been on both flights. For the first 45 minutes, nothing about this flight stood out. Then, at 9:36 local time, Irene 92 called Elmdorf. Elmdorf Airways, Irene 92, over. Elmdorf answered immediately. Go ahead. Elmdorf Airways, Irene 92, experiencing vibration in flight. Not certain of the emergency. We have the aircraft under control, Irene 92. That's the entire message. Vibration. Not sure what's causing it. Aircraft is under control. Elmdorf, working from procedure, asked the obvious follow-up. Are you declaring an emergency? Is that correct? The response that came back was fragmented. A word. Cut off. Silence. Then the transmitter keyed again, but nothing intelligible came through. Then finally, one more clear transmission. Crew, go to oxygen. An order to go to oxygen usually means the crew believes the cabin environment has suddenly become unsafe because of decompression, smoke, fumes, or another emergency. After that, the radio kept keying, short bursts, with no voice behind them, as if someone was trying to transmit and failing, and then, nothing. From the first call reporting vibration to the last burst of static, only minutes had passed. Rivet Amber never checked in again. When an aircraft misses a scheduled check-in, procedure kicks in fast. Colonel Leslie Brockwell, commander of the 6th Strategic Wing, ordered search and rescue into motion almost immediately. Aircraft and Coast Guard vessels combed the waters between Shemya and the Alaskan mainland. Search planes flew as low as 300 feet above the surface, scanning for anything. An oil slick, a life raft, a parachute, debris of any kind. This continued for close to 2 weeks. They found nothing. Not a single confirmed piece of the aircraft. Not a body. Not a raft. In a stretch of ocean that had just swallowed the most expensive aircraft in the Air Force's inventory and 19 men, the sea gave back absolutely nothing. This is the part of the story that tends to surprise people. We're used to aviation disappearances eventually producing at least a fragment, a wing section on a beach, an oil sheen, something. The Bering Sea gave investigators none of that. Whatever happened to Rivet Amber happened completely, and it happened in water cold and remote enough to erase the evidence before anyone could reach it. Here's the piece of the story that keeps investigators and RC-35 veterans arguing even now. We have most of the words. We just don't have the meaning behind them. The order to go to oxygen suggests something escalated fast, likely a pressurization problem or fire, within the space of a few minutes. But the crew never said which. And the fragmented, failed transmissions after that final oxygen call suggest a crew that was still trying to communicate, but running out of time, or out of function, to do it clearly. Vibration in flight could describe dozens of different problems. Many former RC-135 crew members and later historians have suggested the loss centers on that tail damage. If the aircraft had, in fact, lost part of its tail structure in flight, the vertical stabilizer or the antenna attached to it, that would explain violent aerodynamic flutter, rapidly escalating structural loads, loss of control, and eventual breakup, ending with a crash too sudden and too total to leave meaningful wreckage on the surface. Some former crew members later argued that the tail assembly hadn't received a specific structural modification that other RC-135s in the fleet had. Had that modification been done earlier, he believed, the aircraft might not have been lost at all. But that's a theory, built from circumstantial pieces, not confirmed fact. Without the wreckage, without a flight data recorder, and without a single surviving witness, no one has ever been able to say for certain what actually failed on Rivet Amber that morning. Later analyses and recollections by former RC-135 personnel frequently point toward structural failure involving the tail or specialized radar installation, but the Air Force never established a definitive case. Lost in the technical mystery are the 19 men aboard, because the human cost of this story tends to get flattened over the technical mystery. 19 men died that morning. Among them was the pilot, Captain Duncan Wilmore, Major Rudolph Meisner, an electronic warfare officer who, 6 months earlier, had been promoted to major and reportedly handed out Bibles instead of cigars to celebrate. Technical Sergeant Hervey Herbert was, according to family accounts, preparing to leave Shemya to return home for the birth of his child. For decades, these men existed mostly as names on a loss report. It wasn't until 2023, 54 years after the crash, that a permanent memorial to the Rivet Amber crew was unveiled at Offutt Air Force Base. Kingdon Hawes, the man who took the initial call about the missing aircraft as a young captain in 1969, stood behind the memorial as an old man, having spent much of the intervening decades making sure the crew wasn't forgotten. So why, in an age where we can locate airliners on the bottom of the Indian Ocean using satellite handshake data, has nobody found Rivet Amber? Part of it is location. The Bering Sea near the Aleutians is deep, cold, seismically active, and battered by some of the worst weather on the planet. Unlike the search for a modern airliner, there was no debris field to work backward from, no satellite terminal quietly logging position data, because this was 1969. There was no equivalent of a black box pinging from the seafloor. Rivet Amber predates almost every technology that has ever successfully relocated a lost aircraft. Part of it is priority. This was a single Cold War reconnaissance jet lost 60 years ago, not a headline-grabbing airliner and a global news cycle demanding answers. There has never been a Rivet Amber equivalent of a private company searching on spec. No government coalition funding a 100,000 square kilometer sonar sweep. And part of it, frankly, is that nobody knows exactly where to look. The last confirmed position is a rough stretch of open ocean between two islands, based on dead reckoning and a radio transmission, not GPS. Even if someone wanted to search today, the target box would be enormous, and the odds of finding a jet that broke apart at altitude, in water thousands of feet deep, remain slim. The final clear transmission from Rivet Amber wasn't a mayday. It was a goodbye. It was a reassurance. We have the aircraft under control. Minutes later, the only RC-135E ever built vanished into the Bering Sea, in water that has kept it secret for close to 6 decades. 19 men remain with the only aircraft of its kind ever built. Subscribe and let me know in the comments if you've heard of Rivet Amber before today.